Hi everyone. In today's video, we're going to be working through together on the standard of proof in relation specifically to the criminal law. This topic falls within the VCE Legal Studies Unit 3, Area of Study 2. The learning intention for this video is that by the end of this video, you will all be able to define the standard of proof in criminal law as beyond a reasonable doubt, and you'll begin to develop the ability to apply this term to real-life criminal cases. I guess the trap in legal studies is to treat the content as quite dry and abstract. And I think we need to begin developing the ability to understand that the content has real life implications through, for example, real life criminal cases. An example of this is George Pell. Now, the case of George Pell is a real life example of the importance of the standard of proof in relation to criminal cases. In the initial judgment in the county court, Pell was deemed guilty for his crimes. However, Pell appealed to the Court of Appeal based on the logic that the standard of proof was not met in the original hearing in the county court. This was quashed by the Court of Appeal, but Pell then appealed again to the High Court, which actually allowed Pell's appeal. Basically, what the High Court judges argued was that the previous courts had not met, or the jurors in the previous courts had not met beyond reasonable doubt as the standard of proof, because the jurors were basically asked that the standard of proof was flipped. So instead it was Pell having to prove beyond reasonable doubt that this could not have happened, rather than the prosecutor having to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the events could have happened. It was also the presumption of innocence. Another key principle in relation to fairness of the legal system was flipped as well. Remember, the presumption of innocence is that a convicted person is innocent until proven guilty, not the other way around. The High Court ruled that the jurors could not, based on the evidence, be certain beyond reasonable doubt as to Pell's guilt for the reasons previously given to you all. So this case very much showcases the importance of the standard of proof and the real life implications that the standard of proof can have. Now, just a more general overview of this topic. This topic links significantly with the principles of justice, which you should already be familiar with, especially the principle of fairness. And I just alluded to another element of this in the previous slide, that being the presumption of innocence. This topic could appear on the exam as part of an extended response asking about the capacity of either the criminal or civil systems to achieve these principles of justice. It could also appear as a definitions question. For example, it might give you a mock case, and it would ask, what is the standard of proof in this case? It could also ask for a similar question, what is the burden of proof in this case? However, that will be the topic of potentially a later video, as that is outside the scope of this current video. But I guess the term beyond a reasonable doubt is quite ambiguous, isn't it? So I think we sort of need to dive into that term and break down what it means. In the case of Green v. the Queen, 1971, the judge gave this statement on what beyond a reasonable doubt consists of. And I'll just give you a bit of time to read that, and then basically I'll summarize it all for you all. All right, I hope that was enough time to sort of work through that chunk of text. Basically what the judge is saying here is, I like these lines that are really descriptive. It has to be, you have to ask yourself, is it a rational doubt? Is it something which raises a really sensible doubt? Or is it a fantastic sort of doubt? Is it something which arises from some prejudices that I might have? Excuse me. It has to be reasonable. It can't be based on a prejudice. It can't be based on emotion. It has to be, for example, based on the weight of the evidence. It has to be based on a question you might have in terms of an evidential question. These sort of doubts constitute what can be considered a reasonable doubt. And then I sort of want to link it back again, back to those principles of justice, okay? Because I think that's the central sort of framework through which to understand the standard of proof, especially in relation to criminal cases. I think these 2 points are especially critical for this. Ensuring that jurors must be beyond reasonable doubt as to an accused's guilt ensures a fair process due to the high standard required to reach a guilty verdict. That's sort of one side of the argument, where we have this high standard because it's very important not to convict an innocent person. That's almost the ultimate failure of the criminal system, isn't it? When we convict and when we put away when we imprison a person who is wrongly accused and who is actually innocent. However, on the flip side, this high standard in relation to the standard of proof has been criticised for the increasing number of hung juries it has led to and the delays this can cause with some criminal cases. And in terms of justice, this can be quite unfair for some parties due to the associated legal costs and the financial pressure that this can put on some parties to actually even be able to continue with their case in court. And then I guess what I want us all to do is to practice applying this, okay? So we need to practice applying this to the George Pell case. And I guess we need to ask ourselves these two questions. And I put a link here to be able to help you answer these questions in relation to the George Pell case. First question is, what is the standard of proof in relation to George Pell's case? And I'll just give you a minute or so to quickly think through that before I address it myself. All right, so I hope that was enough time to address question one. Of course, the standard of proof in relation to George Pell's case is beyond a reasonable doubt. George Pell's case was a criminal case. Therefore, it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that George Pell is guilty, that George Pell did commit those crimes that they were accused of. For the second question, in relation to George Pell, to what extent can the standard of proof in criminal cases ensure a just and fair legal system? Now, this one's a bit trickier, so you might need a bit more time to sort of work this out. I would suggest clicking back or referring to your notes on the previous slide. They will definitely help you framing the response to this question. I'll give you some time to work through that now. Of course, this question doesn't really have a right or a wrong answer. I can see how this question could be argued both ways. Again, you could argue it has ensured that the legal system is just and fair because George Pell was basically, the presumption of innocence was ignored and George Pell was forced to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they did not commit these crimes. It's sort of been flipped in that way. But I could also see how, in terms of the dragging out of the case, there's had to be two appeals and that's dragged on and on and on. In terms of justice for the victims of this case and justice for the prosecutor, people could argue that way as well. So I can see how this could be argued both ways based on the arguments I've presented to you in this video so far. And I guess I wanted to leave you all with just one final tip in regards to how to sort of get through what can be quite a daunting task, that is getting through VT legal studies. I think it's really important to try and find some recent events to apply your knowledge to. And I think this is important because it will help you get through legal studies, which, like I said before, can be at times quite a dry and abstract subject. I just want you to remember that what you're studying has real life implications. For example, when learning about the standard of proof, I'm sure you all found the standard of proof quite boring. Okay, criminal, beyond a reasonable doubt, civil, based on the balance of possibilities or probabilities, and that's quite dry and abstract. However, when you think about that in relation to a case like George Pell's, you start to see the real life implications of these concepts, of these theories that you were studying in this subject. And it's also really useful in terms of memorizing key concepts for your exam. I'm sure that most of you now, after watching this video, will always remember the standard of proof in relation to criminal cases because you have that framework to think of, what was it in relation to George Pell? What was the issue there? And that helps you memorize key concepts rather than just reading over lines and lines of notes that are quite abstract and dry. I hope this video was useful for you all, and I hope that now you've met our learning intention of being able to use and define the standard of proof in criminal cases, and you're now starting to begin to feel confident in applying that standard to real life criminal cases. Thanks for watching.